only the songs. It's not only the folk dancing. It must contain the cultures. It must contain the contribution of our cultures to the new world. And I have to say that it is a very good experiment, but it must be well balanced. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Slavsky, do you want to respond
Yes,
to that?
I couldn't agree more with you about the second part. The first part, I think, came from an Australian film depicting the true situation as it is. And I think it would be wrong if we didn't show and educated the English-speaking people and others by showing how disagreeable these offensive words are to us. We cannot think them away or forget about them because they do exist, unfortunately. And I believe that by bringing them out in the open and arguing them out, we will exorcise them and make them disappear. Now, as to your other part, of course we intend, if we continue the operation of ethnic television, to have more community input. But you know yourselves how long it takes to produce the smallest of the films, and also how expensive it is in Australia compared to imported material, so that we obviously have to have a cost-effective economic balance. But of course, one of the main attractions of ethnic, or I would agree with you, ethnic is not a very good word, and perhaps some other word may be found for it, because as you said yourself, we want to bring a bridge between the different backgrounds which exist in Australia and the English-speaking population. And finally, English is the language which connects the Eskimo and the Swahili who are here. So in addition to being the official government language, it is also the lingua franca within the whole multicultural society.
Thank you very much for that explanation. But I would expect that the announcer will answer that girl and will put everything in order. I actually contacted the phones which you gave on the screen, and I found a gentleman there on the other side of the line, and I put my objection to that, and there was the second program, there was not even a mention of it. I think there must be an apology for that, and there must be a correction for that.
Excuse me, the first time this word was used was in a film made, I think, by the ABC or by Radio Australia 3 years ago, or by the Department of Immigration. It was an official film. The second is what you saw in the discussion, but she says she uses this less often, was a clipping of a recording made like we are making the recording now today for something to be shown on Sunday. If somebody complains to what you and I just discussed, it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to make an apology in the new clipping in case we show the film again next year.
I'm expecting an apology in the second program, because everybody saw it and everybody is offended by it. And at least we must need somebody who can say, all right, we were wrong. This is all what you need.
George, I think you've got something that you want to come in on this.
I'm a little bit concerned. It seems to me that we're overlooking something, that it doesn't necessarily have to be palatable to the audience, that which is being shown. And it's an unfortunate thing, but that film is needed, and an unfortunate expression is used in it. But it's needed so that that very necessary process of community education can go on. Now, that's one of the reasons why I was a little bit concerned about the format of ethnic television, because I can see what we have being easily converted by our political lords and masters into a multicultural education format, which will not serve the needs of ethnic communities, which will make us more acceptable to the traditional Australian community, so-called. But it seems to me that we must accept the view that there will be programs that won't be palatable to all of us if it continues much along the same lines as has been established at present, even on a grander scale.
Nina?
Well, I think that we must enlarge further on this point, because it appears, in the light of some recent developments, that there is a certain tendency in some quarters, a certain danger to consider ethnic television as a sort of access television, open to all noisy minorities, to fringe organizations with sectional interests to further. What happened to access radio must not be allowed to happen to ethnic television.
That's a double-edged comment, Nick.
Yes, it is. And unfortunately, there are bureaucrats, academics, and very partisan politicians who invent problems in order to find their own brilliant solutions to those problems and justify their positions and their salaries. Now, this mixture, this highly dangerous mixture of politicians, very extremist politicians, not all politicians, academics and bureaucrats, must not be allowed to dictate to a medium, to a very delicate medium, to a very complex medium such as ethnic television. Migrants have problems, but those problems are mostly problems that cut across all sections of the Australian community. And by presenting migrants as people with terrible problems, we only create negative impressions in the whole community, which rebel against migrants. So, there is a danger that someone might turn ethnic television into a sort of a forum open to everyone, and what happens in those cases is that the more articulate, the noisier communities, the noisier sections of the communities have a say, a bigger say than other sections, which will be probably more entitled to put across their viewpoint, and they cannot do it for various reasons. So this ethnic television must not be turned into access television.
Hong, you have a comment. It has to be a quick one, I think, because we've got someone waiting in the audience.
Right. I think that what I like to make has been put forward by all other speakers, but I guess that I could say this. Sometimes you need bitter medicine for very serious disease. And if you are just trying to hide away all the prejudices, you would never solve it. But as for the point that ethnic televisions should not identify a particular community, Arabic or any other community, I think that being an ethnic person myself, I would still be proud to be here as a member of the Australian community. But on the other hand, there's nothing being prouder than being another Vietnamese as well. And I want all to see that I am a Vietnamese. And I want to put forward the Vietnamese point of view, Vietnamese point of culture, and I hope that everybody agrees with me on that point.
Well, we have another question from the audience. Yes, go ahead.
My name's John Petskethaduru, and I represent here the Australian Greek Welfare Society. Can I just mention I'm also chairman of the Media Committee for the Welfare Society. One question that I'd like to ask the panel is, and one opinion as far as the 13 programs so far, is that the welfare feels that it's been a dismal failure, mainly because it has not catered for the people that we would like to see catered for. And that is the older migrants who have come here in the late 50s, whose only language is Greek or Italian or Turkish, who have no other means of communication, who have got 4 commercial channels to listen to or watch but cannot understand what's happening. And at the moment we thought that ethnic television was going to cater for those people who, as gullibly said, 70% of them just don't speak English. Majority of them are males and also women who are at home and have got no other means of communications and entertainment. That's just one feeling that we've had so far in the Welfare Society through clients that come to Welfare Society and also through people in the community. The other issues that I'd like to discuss tonight is moving away from the content beat of the television and programming is also the structure of SBS, and I'd like to bring a few points later on.
Good. We'll come to the structure. We're trying to somehow or other divide it up between content and structure. If we have some other questions and comments on content, and please don't feel restricted only to questions. Your comments are invited and your points of view just as much as any questions. Before we have someone from the audience, I think.
May I give a quick reply to your welfare question? We couldn't agree more with you, but in an experimental situation, when we are trying, rather in a hurry, to produce 13 3-hour programs, which require hours and hours and hours of viewing, we have to go to what is available. We combed the welfare films of most welfare departments. We've seen a few which could have been promising, but they didn't fit for technical reasons, something to do with the size of tape. So this is the field which we will have, obviously, or whoever is running ethnic television in future will have to concentrate. But that is something which will require local manufacture, local filming, and that cannot be turned on in 3 months or in 5 months without planning and execution. But we couldn't agree more that this is a very important chapter and it's missing.
Yes, your turn.
My name is Tanik. I'm from Q Production. And I want to ask Mrs. Klosky and SBS, after 20 years in this country, how long does SBS think that ethnic people be discriminated in showing the films on TV?
Perhaps you could just elaborate. What did you have in mind?
Well, percentage of the show, what we saw in last 13 episodes, it's all overseas. We're living here. I'm not living in Yugoslavia, where I'm from, or Greek who is from the Greece, or Turkish who is from Turkish. We live here, and we like to see the programs from here, and not from overseas.
I think I just answered your question if you say ethnic films instead of welfare films. There are no ethnic films here in Australia ready available when there rather were none by 29th of July, in other words in March, when we started planning. Now, obviously, this type of activity will have to occur provided there is the finance and provided there's enough talent and good stories to sustain making films for ethnic television in Australia.
That a very important point has been raised, and one that's worried me from the very beginning about the whole issue, and that really is the whole basis of the economics of it, and whether or not the thing gets off to a proper start. The whole broadcasting side of it, the technical side, the economic side, the information that is necessary for ethnic communities in particular to make decisions, to become involved in that ongoing debate, part of which is reflected in this minor dialogue we're having at the moment, that's just not been accessible. That's been one of the major defects, if one can say it, of the discussion paper that came out earlier, that somewhere along the line we are not getting enough information about the technical side of broadcasting, the economics of broadcasting, the economics of making films in Australia as against buying them from overseas, so that we can see really where the emphasis should be put in the creation of balance, because what's at issue now is balance. And when one looks at the nature of...
You mean balance as between overseas and local material?
And in respect of the needs of the communities, because we talk about ethnic communities in a universalised sense. We use this very broad concept. We don't distinguish between the needs within those communities. For example, I see very distinct differences between the sort of things we should be doing on ethnic television for adult migrants who have come here as adults but have been principally educated overseas and are concerned with certain aspects of their life because of that, as against the needs of their children born here but who have ethnic identification and who need education or information or entertainment or whatever else in a slightly different framework to that of their parents. Now, there is obviously scope for the overlapping as well, that some programs are suitable for both types of audiences, some are suitable only for adults, some for children. Dr. Sklovsky makes an important point. We're stuck with Sunday morning for the experimental period, which limits the capacity of the broadcaster to do certain things. That in itself is a real problem. But built into this entirely, and that reflects it, is that whole issue of economics and technical information, and that really is not accessible to ethnic communities except at very great cost. If we go out and hire the expertise, which none of us have, I doubt that the Vietnamese...
May I answer? You are absolutely right. We are at the beginning of a long-term experimental situation. If you like, the laboratory scale experiment finishes now. For the next few years, when it continues, in whichever way, will be pilot scale experiment, and many of the questions you so rightly bring up will be answered in 2 years or 3 years and perhaps never, because you cannot sit down in vacuum and calculate how much it would cost. And you bring in vital sociological factors, which I think are the cause why this whole intercultural activity is being carried out. Again, if we had the answers, we wouldn't have this paper. We would just write a blueprint and start operating. And nobody in the world has these answers. We are the first country to try to do that on such a scale.
Well, I think we could take issue over that too, but I think there are experiments in other countries as well that we could be looking at.
Nino, you want to?
May I add a brief comment to that? That is that we need, among other things, to be very practical. We need, with ethnic television needs to give people the product people want and not what some people might think is good for them. The ideas of a few people, even of people who are connected with ethnic communities, might not coincide with what the people really need. One, I must say that we didn't see very much of what went on in the past 13 weeks in those short segments we just saw. But one of the more irritating features of that 13 weeks experimentation was the excessive time allocated to pointless, fruitless, and rather dull discussions, and panel discussions for that matter. And that doesn't say very much for us, yes. I agree with that.
So
and we must be very practical and being in an industry that has to give people what people want, what the product that people want, I must say that we must be very careful in that direction. We must adopt some of the criteria that commercial television has adopted in Australia. That is, of giving people what people want and not what some academics or some genial people think that people need.
What about newspaper editors?
Too right.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
My name is Manjit Sekhon, coordinator of the Indian Group of Languages on Radio 3EA and president of the Sikh Cultural Society of Victoria. Let me start by congratulating the SBS for the excellent effort over the last 13 weeks. With the limited resources, I think they have done an excellent job. We, members of the ethnic community, should not be so sensitive as to our friends from the Arab countries. It takes really a big man to be able to laugh about himself. And there will be times that a number of things will be said about ourselves. Having said all that, I have two questions to ask. First question, there are a number of smaller groups, ethnic groups amongst us. Will there be a possibility to offer these groups a chance on the ethnic TV, or it will be dominated by the larger groups? Secondly, larger groups such as the Greeks, the Italians, and the Germans, and so on and so forth, have their well-established local institutions such as clubs, theaters, pictures, so on and so forth, where they can go and relax at times when the rest of the community, the rest of the ethnic community, which are a smaller group, a younger group, in the sense that they have recently arrived, they must work most of the time, and therefore they are either sleeping or working. During the prime listening time or prime viewing time, we have either Greeks or the Italians or the Germans, as we have in the ethnic radio. May I beg you to think of other communities too when you come to allocate time in the ethnic TV?
Well, that of course is based on one of those assumptions that gets thrown at you all the time,
yes,
assuming that you're going to be allocating the time.
Yes, well, I can answer you for ethnic radio as run by SBS, and I wonder, could this timetable be put on? You may have noticed that very recently on ethnic radio we have had a reorganization of hours and times. The principles of reallocation were to adjudicate time partly in proportion with the size of the population, secondly with the gradient of social needs, which often goes against the size, thirdly, nobody should have less than 1 hour of radio, and finally that 1 hour must be in what they consider prime time. Now this we have done in radio, and is the timetable visible now?
Yes.
So this timetable shows the very complex situation of 41 languages in 18 hours a day the week round. Now, ethnic television, I can only answer what would happen if we were asked to continue, and this is an assumption which at this stage we cannot take. But even whoever will run it, it is quite obvious if you look at this timetable that ethnic television could under no conditions be run in such small compartments, because you would switch off most of the viewers and you would defeat the purpose of the much bigger ability of television to help people to integrate and to cross cultures and to see the cultures. Therefore, we will have to have a different approach, and we have been looking for films or material of any kind from small countries all throughout the experimental period, and I understand that 31 languages have been shown, and quite a few very small countries have already been in it. But again, it will depend on the supply of materials, or whether the local small community can sustain making occasional films or community films or art films or dance or ballet films, like for instance I've seen some small groups performing here. So, but this can only be done at a later stage when a certain continuity for this effort can be assured. It could not be expected for a 13-week experimental program.
Could I? That is well taken. But the aim of the SBS is to provide a community service whereby it assists the newcomers in their settling into the community, and at the same time make the older Australians aware of the problems of the newcomers. With that aim in mind, if the programs are properly produced and presented, I doubt if people will switch off the television when a strange program, as you might call it, comes on the screen. And therefore, smaller communities, as well as the bigger community, has equal amount to contribute to the shows.
Of course.
Thank you.
Dr. Hall?
I think that as a member of a small community, which consists of mostly of newcomers, I would take some exception to the remark that the gentleman just made. I don't think the ethnic television would fulfill its role if it's only aimed at newcomers. Ethnic television, one of the four primary object of ethnic television is information. Maybe it could be filled somewhat, but not taking all the time. The newcomer coming here, the need of their need of information are better provided by some other media, whereby on ethnic televisions you are assaulted not by sound but by sight as well. The way that information that could be conveyed to them, if for example put in 31 or 44 languages, the same thing over and over again, I'm pretty sure that people switch off the television very quickly. The other point is, the smaller community eventually would have more time allocation on the same scale as what maybe on the same principle that ethnic radio have been given now. The Vietnamese community, for example, is not the 12th of the size of the Greek community, but the Vietnamese on 3 got 1 hour, while the Greek got 12. I think that eventually it come out to be a question of cost effective. I think I'm talking as an engineer. You try to get the best for your money. The smaller community has no hope whatsoever of putting forward a permanent program, a permanent segment, even the quarter now. There might be some permanent program on radio, because radio are much easier to produce than on television, involve much fewer people than on television.
Yes, let's go to another member of the studio audience, please.
My name is John Anagnostou, and I represent the Federation of Greek Parents of all schools in Victoria. My remarks are addressed to Dr. Sklovsky. In every question and every remark, you try to find excuses why things they were not so good as they were supposed to be, about technicalities, about the choice of programs, and you mentioned that that was an experiment. An experiment for 13 weeks, Dr. Sklovsky, and we live in 1979. And I'd like to say that there's no excuse. In 1979, already we reached the moon. We know how the Venus is. We are intelligent people. There are specialists and experts in every field, in science, in medicine, in films, and in everything. And you try to excuse that you didn't have enough time. In my opinion, we shouldn't have started this program unless you were ready, unless you had the experts, unless you had the material, because some of the people in this audience said that they were insulted. Maybe they were, I don't know. I personally have seen some of these films, and in my opinion, I cannot yet establish, was that program for the new Australians or it was about new Australians? I cannot.
I would like, first of all, for the first time, to excuse myself if I left you the impression that I was excusing anything. I was giving you hard, plain facts, facts of life. They were not excuses. My only excuse is that I was not understood on that one. Whatever time lead you give, you are asking for a completely finished product and a completely established philosophy and production and supply situation in something which is brand new. Even the simplest things, again, this is not excuse, it's a fact of life. It takes the ABC 8 weeks to order something known from England, and materials of the type we have been using do not exist in England. If they existed in England, we would be falling down, we would be duplicating what exists elsewhere. So the fact that it's now 1979, we all agree. And it will take quite a while of consistent effort by whoever is running ethnic television to come to the finer point which you very justifiably expect. My only difference with you is that you want instant completeness, and I happen to come from industrial background, and I know how long it takes to develop something, even which is absolutely known with all the experts in the world. You cannot start immediate full-scale production of anything without a lead time of years.
Dr. Sklovsky, I think I have explained that before. I said we shouldn't have started if we were not ready.
Well, this is something you cannot learn boxing by correspondence, my friend. You have to get into it. You have to get into such a situation where you get constructive criticism to do better.
Oh, I do understand.
At any stage, whatever we start, we never will be jumping in completely, just impossible. So we started when we were sufficiently ready for reasonably, and as I hear from my friend here on the left, high-quality programs, which some of you happen not to like. Other people like them. Now, none of us has a monopoly for what we like or what we don't like. And this is, again, another purpose of the experiment. The fact that some people feel offended and many other people feel pleased show that the experiment has created enough interest for people not to switch off on an awkward Sunday morning and see that something is being done.
I'm not criticizing you, Dr. Sklovsky, but I'd like to say something else. The program was good. It combined about Australians. It combined for Australians. It was pleasing. It was tremendous. But I believe certain things should go out. I believe that the pleasing factor must go out. I believe that the about Australians should go out and make a program which will please, satisfy the communities individually. Some things which I like, I'm sure other communities they don't like. For instance, Greek music pleases me. It bleeds my heart and fills my body with happiness. Some others, they go sick. Let's be honest. So I think the best thing is to, as I said before, to have the programs individually designed say an hour for Greek, 3 hours for Vietnam, 6 hours for Egypt, and so forth. But should be individually. And if I want to know what time is mine, then I'll switch on the television.
This is a fair enough individual view, and you are free to submit it. This is foreseen in this booklet, so I can't discuss. I mean, this is a trial. I'm not adjudicating. You expressed a very valid view. Somebody else can express an equally valid contrary view or different view, and this is the purpose of the whole inquiry. And we, of course, must come to something which will please, I hope, most of the people most of the time, and displease some people a lot of time.
I'd like to ask the questioner from the audience, are you against the idea that ethnic television should also appeal to Anglo-Saxon ethnics, if I can put it that way?
No, I'm not against, Mr. Chairman. I'm only talking from experience because I've heard as much as you did, perhaps more. It's difficult to please different nationalities.
Right.
What is pride for us, for others is not pride.
I'm really asking whether you see a place for programming in the ethnic television context which would not be directed to any one specific community but to viewers as a whole.
Well, at this stage, really, it's better to stay individually. I don't think the television is ready yet to show what the other communities have to present.
I just wanted to clarify your point. Thank you. And we've got a question on this side now.
Well, I can take up the question that you just made. I think that there is the technical knowledge to be able to...
Perhaps you could just tell us who you are, if you would like to.
Ilias Diakolabrianos is my name, from the Greek Community Council. If a pilot, if it's going to sort of scale it up and look the same as it is at the moment, I think it's going to be a failure. Because it's, I think that, I think that you had to take into account, before you even start to make a pilot, the needs of the communities. If we want ethnic television to succeed in Australia, and if we don't want it to just become another television station with documentaries, as I said, and pleasing material, I think that the process of coming in contact with the ethnic communities should happen, and very quickly, and not just with submissions. I think that the CBS has to make the effort to come in contact with the communities and see what are their needs, and program those needs, and not leave it to the individual who might sit down and write a submission. And that's the only way that we can succeed. I don't agree with Mr. Adazzo that says that we shouldn't do an access television, but at the same time he contradicted himself when he didn't want either the politicians or the bureaucrats to run the station. But in order for that not to happen, you have to contact the community. And that is not happening at the moment.
Do you want access television? Do you fight access television?
What I try to say is that unless you contact the people, then that television station, it's not going to reflect their needs. But it's going to be run from the bureaucrats and the people that you said that you don't want to be run.
No, it will be run by technicians, by experts in their field.
It's not just presenting a beautiful picture, but it's the content of it too.
George, I can see you nodding your head. Or shaking your head, one or the other.
Yeah, I disagree with Nino, obviously, on this. I certainly believe that there's a role for access television as well, whether that came within the framework of SBS or some other successor body. But when Nino puts the question rhetorically, I answer quite simply, yes. I think that there ought to be access television, which is a very different concept to anything that we've been discussing here this evening. And the subject, I imagine, another 3-hour debate.
Yes. May I add to that? I agree with you, George, that there is a room for access television, but not on taxpayers' money, before the needs of the majorities are satisfied. And in this respect, I utterly disagree with you on the facts. We have had input from ethnics and from ethnic groups and from ethnic individuals throughout preparation of this with NIBEC and review of all the films with members of different language groups before the films were accepted. And thirdly, finally, I defy you to tell me which television station in Australia in 20 years of television has shown any films of this type ever. They come from sources which normally are not available or not searched for. Had you been right, it would have been very much easier for us to find suitable films. So I'm afraid I agree with your basic idea, but not with the premises and the accusations you've been giving us.
Just one question. Do you think that NIBAC or CBAC is representing that community, the ethnic communities, the time that you say that you came in contact with those communities?
Yes, I believe that NIBAC and the CBACs are the bodies which represent the ethnic groups much more thoroughly, because they are not subdivisions or subsets, as we call in computer science, of one particular group.
But they are appointed by the government.
Oh, what a terrible thing.
Yes.
What a terrible thing. They're appointed by the government from lists submitted by communities, by individuals, and from individuals who come forward. The government doesn't invent these people. It doesn't make these people. The government...
I don't want to cut off to the debate at this point. Let me just ask the question from the floor. Are you going to be asking a different question? If so, I will ask you to wait just a moment. But if it's in this context, by all means, go ahead now.
No, it is not. It is a statement rather than a question.
Can we just hold on to your statement? Because I don't want it to appear that just the moment we start talking about the government, we cut off the discussion. George, you wanted to come in on this.
Yes, well, the question of advisory bodies and the NIBACs and CBACs of the world is always a bad one. Certainly, to my mind, they're not representative. They never could be, because they miss the whole point of what a pluralist society is about. And I think Nino misses it too in his sideswipe at Access Radio earlier, where he took the issue of 3ZZ on. But the government chose people from lists submitted by certain organisations and ethnic communities. What that avoided was the very clear problem of the whole issue of representation within ethnic communities. It also led to the problem where certain groups who had, to be quite clear about it, resisted the then minister's policy and the thrust of that policy, and were unhappy about the way in which things were going, with whom the government were negotiating at the time, were finally excluded from the process of submitting names. Now, they had to take their stand on certain principles, and they did. But in a sense, a considerable body of opinion stayed outside the NIBAC and CBAC framework, anyone that knows the history or the background of it. Now, I don't know that I particularly want to spend the rest of the night debating that. That's a very important issue. I think it's partly at the base of some of the controversies that have surrounded SBS. And had the government been a little bit more open, forthcoming at the beginning of the whole process, we may well have been able to debate more properly the issue of resources for ethnic groups and representation for ethnic groups on a much broader basis and with a better view to the future.
George, let me just pinpoint what you're saying. Are you saying, in fact, that the process which has led up to ethnic television coming on the air and the 13 weeks that we've had has been a process which, by its very nature, has excluded some or many sections of the ethnic communities?
That's correct.
And you're saying that they haven't had a chance to put their point of view?
Well, they're now putting their point of view in a reactive manner. I mean, SBS is a fact for 13 weeks at least, and for how much longer is another matter in the ethnic television field. In the broadcasting field, it has control of the EA system. Now, in that sense, those groups that, by the stand they took, stood away from the government at the time, and because of our general lack of representative structures for ethnic groups in Australia, this is a social and political problem of the first magnitude which we've all avoided confronting. Now, the groups that are outside are always in a reactive situation. Dr. Sklovsky, quite properly, together with his colleagues, set about trying to create a framework, I think, in an almost impossible conditions. I think with too small a budget and a whole lot of other constraints that were totally unnecessary. But leaving that aside, the groups that are outside are then outside trying to get in. I mean, tonight's the first opportunity, I think, for a lot of people to get their word heard on this issue. Now, reacting to the discussion booklet, for example, required, I think, a fairly high degree of organisational nous. It required people to get together, to study the implications. A lot of people in those groups just don't know the way in which government works. They don't know the submissions game.
But that would be true anyhow, wouldn't it, George? I mean, there would always be a problem in putting your point of view.
Yes, but again, the groups are held out, if you want to call it that way, by the constraints and in a sense by the system, if one can talk about it that way. It's only those groups that are articulate or that have infrastructures that are funded, such as our Australian Greek Welfare or the ethnic press that, and others that can even get into the submissions game at this stage. Literally, a good 60 to 90% of the ethnic community have stayed outside the debate.
They wouldn't be interested
Don't know the ramifications of it.
Would they be interested in it?
I say they are, because I say people are vitally interested in resources that affect them, and when ethnic communities find out the full implications of ethnic broadcasting, which they don't have at the moment, they will take a much stronger interest. And Dr. Sklovsky won't be, in effect, defending himself and his colleagues before 50, 60 or 100 people, but literally thousands. I think you're being, you're denigrating a lot of our own people, Nino, by saying, would they be interested?
No, that isn't the case. That isn't the case. George, there is definitely...
sorry,
I think I'm being misrepresented in that way. I'm only saying that the situation, the question of representation is not as dramatic as you're trying to portray it. Definitely it is not. When you launch a new product, and ethnic television is a product in this commercial world of ours, you take a certain risk. You take the plunge. You play it by ear in the first phases of it.
I emphatically reject the word.
Well, that could be the case.
Well, we'll leave that.
You've got to be practical.
Gentlemen, let's
and
leave that.
finally, you find out what the people want.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back. Let's turn now to the gentleman from the audience who wanted to make that statement. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ivan Kolarik, and I represent the Czechoslovak Society for Arts and Sciences. As anyone here will no doubt realize, it is awfully difficult to divorce politics from ethnic television. It has been alleged on many occasions, and indeed the SBS has been often criticized for not allowing political comment of any kind on ethnic television. May I say with a high degree of gratitude that these charges and fears were proved to be unfounded only last Sunday, when a very apt comment having a rather strong political flavor was allowed indeed on ethnic television following a program on Czechoslovakia. I'm sure that this fact has won the SBS many friends, at least from the Czechoslovak community. I only hope that the SBS will continue to allow a meaningful, and I must emphasize the word meaningful, political discussion in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go to this side now. Yes, you're next.
Yes, Kate Terman's my name. I represent one of the minority groups, the Association of Ukrainians. I think it's just become quite apparent that we've seen two giants fighting amongst themselves as to the aims, the content and attitude of this sort of thing. I wanted to make two comments. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Sklovsky. I think the experiment was absolutely necessary. I think the comments that were made over here were completely unjustified. And secondly, I want to make the point, how are the smaller minority groups going to make certain that their views are heard and in fact expressed, and that they get as much time as the larger minority groups? I think this is absolutely vital. We shouldn't have a couple of Goliaths fighting amongst themselves and find that the smaller minority groups are wiped off altogether.
What are you going to do to help the Davids, Dr. Sklovsky?
Well, I am not in a position. We're finished. We've tried before, and we're trying it on radio, and if we come onto television, of course, we'll continue trying.
Any ideas from the giants on how to help the Davids?
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to get a bit worried about this. First of all, let me reject the giant label. That doesn't take into account our own internal group diversity, which has to be catered for. And that's one of the things which everyone takes for granted on national television. For example, on the ABC, there's significant catering for diversity within what is seen as the traditional formations of Australian society, those the Anglo-Saxon groups, if you want to call it that. So there is a real problem there. But my view on this is, of course, again, it's a question of economics and technology. We haven't really explored all the options. Everybody is talking as if we're going to be limited to one channel and, you know, one set of cameras and this type of thing, that we're limited to one radio broadcasting outlet. A lot of the debate seems to be that we've only got that, you know, 1 week and one studio and one camera type of thinking. Now, I think that is one of the great tragedies of this debate, that we've not, because of a variety of circumstances, been able to look at alternative technologies such as cable.
Well,
television.
look ahead a bit. Well, have
I
you
look
got some
ahead, yes.
ideas on how you might provide for smaller communities?
I think we have to look at the options such as cable television and what that entails. We have to look at more than one channel, and we have to consider the economics of it rather more seriously than we have at this time.
But while we look at these, let's for heaven's sake start the first channel and start doing something, not only looking.
And
I must say the Giants are starving a bit on ethnic television at the moment. I don't see much sustenance for Greeks in the last few weeks.
Nino, how are you faring?
well, there is one point which has not been made up to this minute. There, on the future and on the economics of ethnic television, there is whether the basic question, whether ethnic television is going to be entirely independent or is going to be opened, or ethnic television should accept commercial advertising or sponsorship. Thinking of the smaller groups in particular, I have no doubt in my mind that to open ethnic television to commercial interest would be both dangerous and unethical, generally speaking. For a start, it would be a dangerous precedent for the ABC. And not many people in this community would relish the idea of an ABC open to commercial interests.
Well, Nino, you've again opened up, just a moment, you've opened up a whole new subject there. We will come to it. The whole issue of commercial involvement in ethnic television is worth...
Sorry, Sam, I only wanted to point out that with commercial sponsorship of ethnic television, the only groups that would suffer would be the minor groups, those groups which would not attract sufficient commercial advertising or sponsorship.
Okay, point taken, and your turn.
Anthony Sarantonio. I'm a member of NEBAC and also a member of the Italo-Australian Cooperative Social Club in Sunshine. I've heard a criticism here this evening on members of NEBAC on their appointments, etc. I'd just like to say that I don't think many of you people realise the work and effort put in by the individual members of NEBAC. As far as the representation is concerned, if one takes time and to analyse the efforts each one of them puts into their individual communities, I think you'd all be surprised. Individually, if you analyse them personally, I think many of you people here don't realise what has happened in the last 18 months to 2 years. One point that I do make, and I like to sort of make it very clearly, that at no time at NEBAC's meetings as the government interfered with the ideas and viewpoints of NEBAC members. The members have always looked in the best interests of the ethnic communities, and I assure you that we will continue to do so until our term expires. The point that I want to make, besides that, is that I think George Papopoulos, you made the point, you stressed the point, economics, earlier on this evening. This is the point that I'd like to touch on, that I think we, as an ethnic community, or ethnic groups, I think we've got to sort of look at the costings of this ethnic television. If we want a professional television station, I think we've got to go back to the government and say to them, this is going to cost X amount of dollars. Because I really believe that the Australian film industry is just about to kick on in this country. And I think we, as groups of multicultural backgrounds, I think we can assist the Australian film industry greatly if we could all unite together and with the government assistance And I think this is where it comes in. I think we've got to get there and fight and fight and fight for money, because that's what ethnic television's all about. If we've got money, then we can produce. If we haven't got money, then we can't produce, and we will be subjected to importing films from overseas. Thank you very much.
Right. Yes, your turn, please.
My name is John D'Andrea. I'm from Ethnic Radio. I'm an Australian of Italian origin. I think that one of the relevant comments when the discussions on ethnic television started was made by you, Mr. Lipsky, on ABC Radio, referring to ethnic television as the fifth channel. I think a lot of people are missing out that as the fifth channel, one day, provided it is on the same frequency, and you don't have to use too many attachments or gadgets to listen to things in other languages, it would have to compete for ratings with the other four channels. And as such, it would have to be different and innovative. Unfortunately, the discussion here shows tonight that between what has been able to produce with all the limitations and what the ethnic communities expect, there is a large gap to fill. And maybe the solution is in that very point that SBS or whatever other person has to deal with this. And I think that whoever's got to deal with it needs a lot of sympathy from the community in general. Is this that you try to do too many things at once? The success of radio, to a point, has been given by the fact that it has informed and entertainment. There's been very little in depth. We've been limited to what was available from overseas. And if one takes the example of what has happened so far, I don't think there is a hope or opportunity for training people to do things here. People who have been here a long time, they are people from the smaller communities and who naturally want something done about them here more than at home. We have had, unfortunately, examples on ethnic television of blatant political advertising from overseas, and there was possibly no hope because the film was good. It was worth giving a go. And in the shorts that we've been shown here tonight, the Latvians had to be reminded that they've never been free, so they might as well accept the management that they've got at the moment. All these things probably a Latvian who has been here for a long time had almost forgotten. And I don't know that all the issues can be resolved. If ethnic television is to be used to remedy what the other four channels did not do for 20 or 25 years, then I think we need more than one channel. If it is to do an educational job for all, not only the Anglo-Saxons, ethnics of Australia, but for all in English, then we are expecting too much of one channel. I think the ethnics did not ask for ethnic television, they were promised that, and in the light of the success to a point of radio, or various forms of radio in different languages, one would have expected a more similar approach. And the fact that they should not be covered by commercialism would guarantee the very minor groups, and I'm using their expression, I think that they should be getting more time and more assistance because they are the ones that need it most. The rest of the communities can advertise. So far, if one looks between the positive and the negative on ethnic television, I think that ethnic television has done more to improve the commercial programs on other, or the content, particularly on Channel 2, of films of ethnic theme. So most of the things are beautiful. There's no great complaint about it, but they could have easily been seen on Channel 2 or on any of the other commercial channels. Ethnic television, the fifth channel should be for ethnic television.
Thank you. We are really now drawing to a close. So let's see if out of all this we might be able to sum things up. I'd like to ask each of the members of the panel now in turn to just look ahead a bit, look to the future, and give us, if they can, in that magical 1 minute, their own impression of what the ideal ethnic television channel might look like. Looking well into the future. George, let's begin with you.
Well, again, I reject the ideal channel. I think there have to be channels. I think we have to look at a whole series of channels coupled with cable television and any other sort of technological developments that can be brought into that field, which will enable us to service both the smaller and the larger communities, because we'll always have the problems of the allocation of times, prime times and things like that. I see it being predominantly an ethnic language medium rather than an English language medium, which is the main problem that I think I have with the current experiment. I see it developing equally with locally produced materials and bringing materials in from overseas, and as I said, catering to several discrete audiences. In other words, different audiences even within communities. I see it as being nothing other, if you want to put it that way, as a replica of the whole of the broadcasting system that we now have. but with the advantage that it's in languages directly accessible to those parts of the community that, one, need them, and two, want them. And there's distinctions there.
Nino.
Well, I can only say that I think that there is a future for ethnic television. There is a need in Australia for ethnic television, but for heaven's sake, let's be practical in our approach to television. Let's give people what people really want, what people really like, and not what some academics would like people to hear and listen.
Dr. Hung.
I think that what needs to be said has already been said. All I want to add is there is an old proverb saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a small step. We already begin that step. I don't think we're going to march backward anymore. But I just hoped that ethnic television would turn out to be a good journey and a never-ending journey for all of us, and not to subject to certain pressure group in order to deviate from the original aims and serving those groups alone.
Dr. Skowski, a final quick word from you.
I hope that we will have something more transcultural or intercultural, which will help the communities to maintain their cultures, to show the young what the cultures are like, and to show the rest of all of Australia how we all can integrate into one multicultural, multilingual Australian society.
Thank you, and my thanks to the members of the panel, and from all of us here, our thanks also to the studio audience who've joined us today in this discussion of, let's hope, the future of ethnic television in Australia. And that's all from us here today.
And that's the end of the final programme for the moment. We hope you've enjoyed the series. We hope too that ethnic television will be back later in the year. But for now, goodbye, au revoir, arrivederci, adios, auf Wiedersehen, do widzenia, do svidania.
relaying to stations in New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. Part of the ABC national network, relaying through 84 transmitters across Australia.